Namaste. Hello, this is Sonali Gokte, and I'm reading from my mystery novel, The Ripple Effect. We are on to chapter 5 now. When the alarm went off at 5:30 a.m. on Tuesday, Ishani had a very strong urge to turn it off and go back to sleep. But she forced herself to get up. She had a cup of tea. That always helped. Now she was completely awake. She went to the gym thinking she would run on the treadmill for a while and do some weights. She entered the gym and just stood there. There was only one other person there, Neil. He was running on the gym's only treadmill, dressed in shorts and a vest. He looked really fit. Tall and slim, running at a good speed. He looked graceful and at ease. She knew he was 37, but in those shorts, his muscular arms swinging as he ran, Ishani felt he looked very energetic and much younger. He saw her in the mirror, smiled and waved at her. She waved back and got onto the stationary bike. She had been cycling for about 20 minutes and had begun to wonder if Neil was ever going to get off the treadmill when he finally slowed down. Then he said, "Great minds and all that," and gave her another smile. Ishani said, "Yeah, all that," but felt like saying, "Forget the mind, you have a great body." When Neil got off, she went to the treadmill and started running. She could see him in the mirror as he started working the different machines. Boy, this was going to be difficult. She didn't want to feel attracted to him. He's a married man, she told herself. But her mind was not listening to her. She ran only for about 10 minutes and then went to the free weight section on the other side. Fortunately, she didn't see Neil from here. She worked the weights for a while and then came around. She wanted to do some ab exercises, but the only place for that would be right next to where Neil was doing crunches. Being so aware of him, she just couldn't bring herself to do that. So she did some pushes against a wall and decided to call it a day. She said, "Bye, Neil," and was about to walk out of the door when he said, "Bye, partner. See you at the breakfast around 8." She walked back to her room and just sat on one of the chairs for a few minutes. She needed to collect her thoughts. She switched on the TV and selected a news channel. That would help her take her mind off Neil and his physique. Taking off her workout clothes, she went into the bathroom and got into the shower. It felt good to let the water run over her body. When she came out, the TV news reader was running a report about the law minister accusing the Minister of State for Industries of meddling in the affairs of the law ministry. Ishani found herself laughing. Politicians were such good entertainers, she thought. She had been absolutely right in turning on the news channel. She felt cheerful as she got ready. She wore a cream colored shirt with her jeans and, like the previous day, tied her hair into a ponytail. Today they would be going over to see Manjiri's aunt and, if time permitted, her lawyer. So instead of the canvas shoes she had worn the previous day, she put on flat sandals. They were easier to take off if required. Ishani went down for breakfast 5 minutes before 8. Neil was nowhere to be seen yet. So she chose a table close to window overlooking a small garden. She put her backpack on the spare chair and asked for a cup of tea. She had just gotten up to go and get some food from the breakfast buffet when Neil entered the coffee shop. She waved to him and he walked over. He looked formal and very good in brown trousers and light green shirt. If she closed her eyes, she could still imagine him in his shorts and vest, but it was not bothering her as much now. He smiled and said, I am not late, you are early. She smiled back, nodded, and said, yeah, and I am very hungry. Let me go get something. They drove over to meet with Mrs. Rekha and Mr. Vikram Pandey, Manjiri's aunt and uncle. Mrs. Pandey was Manjiri's mother's younger sister and claimed that she had been very close to Manjiri. She was the one disputing the new will. Mr. and Mrs. Pandey lived in a penthouse in one of the developments that boasted of three 12-story towers. After a brief security check at the gate, they made their way to Pandey penthouse. The door was opened by Mr. Pandey and they entered the living room. Mrs. Pandey was in the bathroom, they were told. Mr. Pandey was a well dressed man. He wore crisply ironed blue jeans and a maroon collared t shirt. He was of average height and his hair was mostly grey. He was more than eager to talk to them. So, in the 10 minutes they spent waiting for Mrs. Pandey, they had heard about how Mr. Pandey had retired from a very high position in a company in the oil and gas industry and moved to Pune only 2 years ago. He found it difficult to be retired. They had to get used to a different lifestyle, even though they had made an effort to maintain their lifestyle as much as possible. They had made sure that the apartment they bought for themselves was in the right locality and came with all the right trimmings. Each room in their four-bedroom apartment was air conditioned and had a flat screen TV. They had a separate room for the servant. He added how it was essential to have a live in servant if they wanted to continue to live at the standards they were used to. Ishani was getting bored listening to the man. She looked at Neil and guessed that he too was bored but was making an effort not to show it. Ishani was wondering how long she would have to listen to this lifestyle drivel when Mrs. Pandey came in. She was a chubby woman of medium height, a round face with a double chin, and short hair that was dyed pitch dark. She walked as if she was in a hurry. She wore a pink salwar suit with no dupatta. She looked like a middle class housewife, a poorly dressed one at that. Somehow, her overall appearance was contradictory to the whole high end lifestyle spiel her husband had been giving them. Mrs. Pandey sat down on the chair next to her husband and smiled at them. Hello, hello, I'm Rekha Pandey. And you must be the detectives who wanted to talk to me. She talked like she walked, in a hurry. I had planned to be all ready, but what to do? My son called from Australia unexpectedly. Today was not our usual day to talk. We chat on Skype twice a week. My son and daughter in law are very busy. They are near Brisbane, both working. But today is a holiday for them. And they have a small son. So they need my help. So when they call, I can't say no. And my grandson then had to talk to me. Ishani was waiting for a pause in Mrs. Pandey's hurried monologue to cut in and steer the conversation to the investigation. But the woman just seemed to go on at a breakneck speed. Everyone turned around in alarm when Neil started coughing. Mrs. Pandey got up saying, let me get you some water, and walked to the kitchen. When Ishani looked at Neil, he winked at her and she realized that he had done that just to stop the tirade. Taking the cue, as soon as Mrs. Pandey came in with the water, and while Neil was taking a glass from the tray, Ishani said, Mrs. Pandey, as you know, we are here to talk about Manjiri, your niece who died last month. Yes, yes, of course, Mrs. Pandey said and then continued. You know, it was such a shock for me and my family to hear about her death. She was only 43 and quite healthy. Who would expect her to just swim out on her own like that and drown? Neil had stopped coughing after sipping some water and he was all ready to start asking questions. You are Manjari's closest relative, Mrs. Pandey, so we would like to hear about her from you, Neil said. Yes, yes, I am her mother's younger sister. We were always close. I was only 17 and studying when Manjari was born. I saw her grow up, you know. After I got married, I couldn't meet my sister as much as I would have liked. My husband was in a transferable job and we were posted to remote places. But I tried to come over as much as possible. And I had them come over to our place many times. You know, we have always had a high standard of living. We stayed in big houses, always had servants. I wanted my sister and Manjari to also be able to see all that and enjoy the luxury. My sister used to come visit often till Manjari went to college. Then we didn't get to meet as often, but we always talked on the phone. Every week we would talk and tell each other about the day to day happenings in our respective households. She was saying a lot, and it was more about her, not about Manjiri. Ishani was wondering if Neil was going to start coughing again, and she heard him literally cut in and say, Mrs. Pandey, can you please tell us about Manjiri? We need to know her as a person. That seemed to do the trick. Mrs. Pandey stopped and asked, so when you say you want me to tell you about her, what you want to know? Ishani looked at Neil, wishing that he would ask specific questions and not let the woman talk freely like this. He looked at Ishani once as though she had said it out loud and then turned back to Mrs. Pandey. Was Manjiri a reckless person? Manjiri was very adventurous. You know, from the childhood, she always wanted to do these kind of crazy things only. Always doing something or the other, like going for treks in the Himalayas, even bungee jumping. But she used to be rather scared of water. I don't know why she just went into the deep water like that. If she was alone, she wouldn't go swimming in our society's pool also. But every summer, she used to go off to Himalayas. And is it possible that someone else was there with her and that's why she went into the deep water? Neil asked. He had taken control of the situation now. He asked the next question as soon as he had heard what he was looking for, even though Mrs. Pandey was still talking. Mrs. Pandey looked confused. But police said she went in alone. That is what they told us. Ishani jumped into the conversation and said that is what was believed. But now the case is reopened to investigate from other angles. One of the possibilities we are considering is whether there was someone with her when she went into the water. Oh, oh, I see. I thought you wanted to talk to me because of the will. You know, Manjari's lawyer is playing some game. She is now saying that Manjari made a new will. But we know that can't be true. Manjari made her will when my sister and brother in law suddenly died 4 years ago. We were in Assam at that time. But of course, we came away right away. We came over right away. Then Vikram helped Manjari to make the will before we went back. Though Mrs. Pandey had gone off on a different track, this information was useful. Surprisingly, it was Mr. Pandey who brought her back by saying, Rekha, they are asking a different thing. Whether Manjiri would have gone in the deep by herself. But Vikram, I don't know. You know, she never went swimming on her own. Neil then addressed the next question to both of them. When did you know about Manjiri's death? Mr. Pandey replied, on 17th March at around 4:30 p.m., a police inspector and a constable came home. They asked us if we knew Manjiri. When we told them that she was Rekha's niece, they told us that she had drowned that morning and her body had been sent for postmortem. What did you do then? They told us we had to go to Sassoon Hospital to take the body once the postmortem was over. He paused for a few seconds and then went ahead. Rekha was beside herself. I didn't know how to manage everything. So I called a friend of mine over. Manjari's body was released to us on 18th and we performed the last rites on the same day. Did you know that Manjari had gone for the outbound program? Mrs. Pandey spoke very quietly. Yes, I knew. I had talked to her on the morning of the 16th when she was leaving for the campsite. She had told me that she would return on the 18th and that her phone would not work at the campsite. Do you know any of the people she worked with? Mrs. Pandey thought for a bit and replied, she had taken me to Heman Joshi's place once. He was her boss, but they were also very good friends. Then she went ahead, but I don't think Heman's wife had liked our visit. She wouldn't come out. When Hemant went inside saying he will call her, we could hear her yelling. He was trying to calm her down, but she would not listen. She wanted us to leave. So, did she come out? Ishani asked. No. After a few minutes, Hemant came out and told us that she was not feeling well, so she would not come out. She hesitated for a moment and then said, I had felt very awkward and wanted to leave, but not Manjiri. When Hemant came out and said his wife was not feeling well, she actually had smiled and said, I can understand her not feeling well. I found that statement very strange and even asked Manjiri about it. What did Manjiri tell you? She said that Hemant's wife was jealous of working women and especially of Manjiri because she worked closely with Hemant and he respected her. Could you hear what Mrs. Joshi was saying when she refused to come out? We could hear her in parts. She was saying something like, I want her out of my house and I refuse to meet them. Do you remember when this was? Mrs. Pandey did remember. This was last year, sometime in January. I remember because we had first gone shopping and seen a sweater just like the one I was wearing. Mine was from Australia, you know. As Ishani made a note that she needed to talk to Mrs. Hemant Joshi, Neil asked, Mrs. Pandey, can you tell me why you think the new will is fraudulent? Mrs. Pandey looked at her husband, but he just nodded to her, indicating that she should go ahead and say what she wanted to. See, after my sister died, Manjiri made a will. As per that will, she had left everything to my daughter, me, and a paternal cousin. Now, suddenly, where did this new will come from? She had not told me anything. If she was changing the will, she would have talked to me. Why would she want to hide it? Mrs. Pandey added, look, it's not like I need Manjiri's property. It is nothing compared to what we have. My daughter too is quite well off. But we think this new will is all fraud. Manjari's advocate is making it up. I am Manjari's closest relative, and Manjari would have told me if she had changed her will. She wanted to make another point. See, basically, we want to stop wrong people from getting Manjari's property. Where is your daughter, Mr. Pandey, and what does she do? Rashmi is married and settled in Delhi. Her husband is a businessman and she works with him. They are quite well off. They have their own house in Paschim Vihar. It's a very high end locality, Mr. Pandey said proudly. What is his name? Your son in law, that is. And what kind of business does he have? Ishani wasn't sure why Neil was asking for this information. Vishal Bhatnagar. He has three different dealerships and he invests in various businesses.